We've already established that the nature of law is to declare what is good and evil, what is right and wrong, what is just and unjust. Natural law, law established by God before written law existed or any state had been established, law that is unchanging and the only reliable basis for a stable society and a system of justice, God's law, is the supreme law. Justice can only exist if there are moral absolutes, and to promote justice, one needs to know the difference between good and evil. The Christian God, the Bible, is the source of moral absolutes and knowing the difference between good and evil. Related to the nature of law, we conclude then, the purpose of law is to restrain evil and promote justice. However, even though all of God's laws are just, because God by his nature is just, not all of God's laws are to be mandated and enforced by the state. Allowing the state to mandate all of God's laws would create a theocracy, a totalitarian dictatorship, much like those found in Islamic countries. That is why one of the 5 standards to determine if a law is just or unjust is, a just law must not contradict God's law. Violating God's law is a sin, but not all laws, and thus sins, are punishable by the state. That leaves us with the question, which of God's laws, which sins are within the purview of the state, and which are under the purview of the church or family or friends, or which, if any, are solely between God and man as an individual? I would argue that a rights parameter serves as an effective bright line, or criterion, in determining which sins are under the purview of the state and which are not. If the sin violates a person's rights, then it is punishable by the civil government. Unless clearly expressed in Scripture, if a sin does not violate a person's rights, then it is not punishable by the civil government. Consensual sins, such as adultery, or sins of the heart, such as coveting or worshiping other gods, even drunkenness, do not violate the natural rights of others. Thus, the church, family, or friends have the authority and responsibility to address those. If the enforcement of a law meant to punish a sin requires the violation of natural rights, then that sin is not within the sphere of the state's authority to punish. For example, if the first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me," was made a civil law, then an individual's right to freedom of conscience and right to speech, among others, would be violated. Moreover, Scripture makes clear that people should not be coerced into being Christian. Thus, the first commandment as a civil law would be unjust. It violates God-given natural rights. To conclude, unless Scripture clearly expresses otherwise, only when a sin violates a person's natural rights does the state have the authority to punish it. One can conclude from this that prostitution and selling, buying, and using drugs, since the act of both are voluntary and do not violate other people's rights, are not sins punishable by the state. Like most people, I do not want my community to look like the red light district in Amsterdam. So am I missing something? Does Scripture make clear that the civil magistrate has the God-delegated authority to punish such acts? Or what about adultery and homosexuality, 2 sins that destroy God's design for the family, the building block and foundation of society? They too are sins that are committed consensually and thus, based on the rights parameter, are not subject to be punishable by the state. Does Scripture clearly show God delegated to civil government the authority to punish those sins? If so, where? Am I missing something? Please share in the comments section.